conflict that's not resolved going on time can actually create disconnection and maybe even end our relationships. But the perspective that I want to offer here of around conflict is, ironically, conflict has the potential and the pathway to actually have us be closer. And that's also what like lights me up about this, because when we have conflict, when we're willing to lean in and address that, we can learn about ourselves, we can learn about one another, and we can learn ways of being in more harmony together. So there is a part of me that sometimes gets a little excited when conflict happens, because there's like gold and treasure on the other side if we're willing to show up for it. Year and a half ago, I was sitting in a tree, and it was in a vision quest. I was sitting there for hours, and the acronym repair showed up, and all the words that came with it encapsulate the 14 years of me studying communications and relationship. And so that's where the acronym came from, and that's a little bit of my journey of how I am here now.
The container is now open. Repair is a way that we maintain connection, and it's also many times a really great way to actually deepen our connections. That's the message of Dr. Hazel-Grace Yates. She comes on the pod to describe the super simple but extremely effective repair process, something that represents over 14 years of intensive study and true mastery of human connection. If you are interested in learning more about the repair process, go to drhazelgrace.com. If you hurry, you can sign up for an 8-week course, which begins July 2nd and runs all the way to August 20th. And just a heads up, the interview had like patchy video, and the internet companies have yet to make repair to us for the impact they made, but we forgive them anyways, and we bring you this incredible interview. Dr. Hazel-Grace, welcome to the container.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
So yeah, a level of my experience that I want the audience to be aware of is that before meeting you over Zoom, Sai and I have been taking the Authentic Facilitator course by Authentic Revolution, which you created a lot of the materials. And so I actually, I have like some audiovisual parasocial relationship with you already, which is something I want to note and for the audience.
Cool.
So we're wondering, Hazel-Grace, will you tell us a little bit about your path, about yourself, how you got into the relational arts? Due to this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. My before life, before I became a sex and intimacy coach, I was actually working with people with disabilities, and I was in the outdoors. And then I went to Burning Man when I was 29 years old, and I discovered my body and pleasure for the first time. And I took a quick detour from what I was doing to being a sex and intimacy coach. And so for the last 14 years, I've been doing that: relationship, sexuality, intimacy. And something I discovered along the path is people would come to me and they were like, we want better intimacy. And then I'd start working with them, and I was like, oh, you're not feeling intimate because there's some unresolved conflict. And like there's some hurt or disconnection. And of course, you don't want to be intimate if you're not feeling connected. And so what I started to realize is that this was coming up with my clients, and I was realizing I'm actually really good at this. And one of the reasons I'm really good at this is I grew up in an environment where lots of love growing up, but my dad was from a military background, so lots of yelling, intimidation, as discipline. And so then I recreated really unhealthy relationships because I thought that was normal, right? So then I was in unhealthy relationships for a long time. And then there was a point I was bound and determined. I was like, I want to experience a healthy relationship in my life. And so I dove deep into therapy, trainings, education around communications and relationship. And so I all that hard work paid off because I'm very happy and proud to say that my dad and I have healed our relationship and we are best buddies and we travel around the world together. And 6 months after I had that healing relationship with my dad, I met my beloved, the love of my life. I'm in a very happy, long-term, secure, polyamorous relationship. And the thing that we're really good at is navigating conflict. And about uh, a year and a half ago, I was sitting in a tree and it was in a vision quest. I was sitting there for hours and the acronym repair showed up and all the words that came with it encapsulate the 14 years of me studying communications and relationship. And so that's where the acronym came from. And that's a little bit of my journey of how I am here now.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah, there's so much there. I can't wait to get into these. The first thing that came up for me is that the idea of a sex and intimacy coach. I actually don't. Yeah, I don't know what that would really look like or what that process is of helping people connect in that way. That I think it's for many people probably beyond their edge just to seek out a third person to help in that way, in that field. And then like how do you navigate that and facilitate people in that space?
How do I navigate and facilitate people as a sex coach? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and just like what is that process like? I just kind of want to know more about that in general. It just feels,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
very,
Yeah. Yeah, so people will reach out to me. They'll find me through word of mouth, through all the ways that they can find me. And I will say, by the time someone calls me, they're already at some level of it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to even ask for help, right? And so when someone calls me, my job is really to assess where are you now, what are you challenged with, and where do you want to go. So a lot of people will come to me if they have, dysfunction or trauma or having a difficult time with boundaries or, yeah, just like painful sex. Yeah, so those are some of the reasons they come to me, and yeah, I just meet people with where they are and help them experience more empowerment, more pleasure, and and one of the reasons that I'm really excited about working with people around communications and sexuality is how we show up in the bedroom and how we show up in our relationships is often how we show up in the rest of our lives. So one of the things that I've gotten really good at is being able to ask for what I want in life because I've learned how to ask for what I want in the bedroom. So that's one of the reasons why I get excited about, working with people around intimacy because it's like these skills are translatable to our work, our family, our friends, our neighborhood, empowerment, asking for what we want and saying yes and no in a
mm,
really clear way.
yeah. Something I'm noticing too is like there's something about sexual connection that's much more fragile. Like you have to have a lot more in place. You kind of touched on this earlier. Like you really can't be in conflict, and I mean to a certain degree for most of life you can't really be in conflict and then be turned on by someone. There's sort of this way that is such like a, yeah, like fragile magical little connection, so that like you really have to be high tuned in connection to keep that healthy and clear over time. So I'm appreciating, yeah, the way that work gives you special access to how humans connect.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah. Fragile. I like that new word.
Magical.
Fragical. It rhymes with magical.
Mm.
Yeah, I got that.
It made me, as you were describing that too, the discovery or the way that conflict and intimacy are at such odds, um made me think back through major relationships of my life, and I'm like,
Mm.
oh yeah, I guess that is when everything kind of turned. And oftentimes it's like these slow sort of ruptures or slow sort of under the surface ruptures that aren't necessarily, it's not like, oh, this big thing happened and now I'm turned off by you. It's like these little things that um are sort of clicking off, like, okay, now I don't know, I'm at least in my experience, there
Hmm.
there were like a lot of little under the surface, like, we're getting along fine, we're doing the day to day, but there's
Hmm.
these little things underneath that are making me not want to have sex with you anymore. And then that
Yeah.
in turn turns into all these other issues.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I have in my course, I talk about a charge scale. So charge scale is how intense does something feel, like an upset, conflict, misunderstanding feel. And the idea is, so a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like the extreme, really, really hurt, mad. One is like almost unmentionable. It's like just a whisper of a like twinge of a hurt. And the idea is, if we clear the ones and the twos and the threes on a regular basis, when we have the skills and the capacity and the confidence, the competence to be willing to lean in and say, hey, this is it's a small thing, but it feels important for me to name it so that it doesn't build and so that it doesn't become a 6, 7, 8, 9. Because the patterns and the things that we're not addressing can become more complex and more intense when, if we were to clear them when they're really small, it's not that big of a deal. And people have resistance of like, I don't want to seem like difficult, or I don't want to bring up things, or I don't want to like, talk about the challenging stuff. And it's like, talk about that stuff. That's actually going to get you closer. Um, the other interesting thing I think about is conflict that's not resolved going on time can actually create disconnection and maybe even end our relationships. But the perspective that I want to offer here of around conflict is, ironically, conflict has the potential and the pathway to actually have us be closer. And that's also what like lights me up about this, because when we have conflict, when we're willing to lean in and address that, we can learn about ourselves, we can learn about one another, and we can learn ways of being in more harmony together. So there is a part of me that sometimes gets a little excited when conflict happens, because there's like gold and treasure on the other side if we're willing to show up for it.
That's so true. Ooh, I love that. I love how true that feels. And I remember having an experience recently um where I was like, so where a conflict occurred and I was like, okay, at least I know that I'm working with this person, and that there's going to be, I mean, hopefully, unless it's like over forever, something better on the other side of this. And having just that little bit to hold on to as you're going, like you said, it excites you. I imagine that's like me further down the path, like with more practice. um
Hmm.
Feeling a little bit excited, whereas I at least use it now at this point in my development, like as a, okay, from what I've learned so far about conflict, on the other side of this is going to be something a
Mm.
little bit better than where we are right now. um
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what's that's bringing up something for me about the I feel like I've really had a pervasive pattern a lot of my life to be avoidant. And I even remember like moments in my life where I like made special promises to myself that I would like not I would like hide my life from people, or like from certain people. Or like, I would like make these conscious choices to like pull away from people and assert that as just the way that I am around this person. And then as I've done a lot of personal work, seeing how much that avoidant pattern is it's such a natural reflex that I don't even realize that that kind of behavior is a choice, or that it's like it could be done a different way. So often when I've experienced conflict, I don't have this like energy spike. I have like a kind of just looking away, almost feeling like bored or fuzzed out, or yeah,
yes.
overly numb and neutral, and just like, I think I'm gonna like miss me with that bullshit. I'm like not gonna deal with that. And yeah, having this kind of like arrogant sort of like, that's lame. I'm not dealing with that. as this way to protect me from the conflict. And yeah, that's just coming up for me, that um it can look many different ways, not wanting to engage with even low charge conflict. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And a couple things on that. One is it totally makes sense. Like avoiding the conflict because it doesn't feel good and you just want to ignore it or just move away from it. And especially if that's been like a strategy or adaptive thing that you've created to help you move through the world. And so much of the work that I do is somatic based, meaning like noticing what's happening in our bodies. So you can actually like start practicing and tuning into when does that fuzz happen? When does that like numbing? When does that happen? What do you notice happening in your body when that happens? And so when you become aware of it, you can then assess, oh, hey, I'm doing that thing. Is this serving me to avoid it? Or would there be any service to me actually leaning in and moving towards?
Mm,
So the somatic cues can help you determine, assess if clearing the thing would be more in service to you.
mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is funny that you mentioned that. I was just going to ask you because um I think that the low charge thing is so interesting, like clearing things that are low on the scale, on the charge scale, like 1, 2, and 3. Um,
Mhm.
I think that, yeah, I'm just going to use I have to use I think I just have to use myself as an example that when it's a 1, 2, or
Yeah.
3, I often will just say, oh, well, I can deal with this on my own. I don't need to bring it to the relational space because this is mine to, to work through and handle. Like I need to just own the parts of this that are mine, and that maybe bringing it to the spaces, to the relational space, is actually going to just inflate it and make it higher in charge. And
Mm.
and I wonder if that is the best move. Like yeah, or I think that that Jonathan and I actually get into that, like or maybe it's like a confused, like, do we bring this up? Do we not bring this up? Because he's more in the avoidant and I'm more in the like, I will own everything. It's all me. Like I will own it all. Um,
Mhm.
to the extent that, like, I don't know, maybe a little,
Mhm.
obviously too much at times.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hearing y'all say that, I noticed the desire to talk about some of the steps because it's
Yeah.
applicable to what you're saying. Um, so I want to talk about the first three steps. So REP is the preparation. So this acronym is so cool. I didn't make up the acronym, it came from Spirit, but I get excited every time I talk about it. So REP is the preparation, and then the air, is the clearing the air conversation. So
Mm,
you do the first three steps to prep for the clearing the air conversation.
Whoa.
So a conflict happens, some sort of misunderstanding happens. So the first step is you resource yourself. And when I say resource, I mean your nervous system, your how regulated you are. Because when we're in a dysregulated state, we're not going to be saying what we mean to say. We're not going to be able to hear the other person. We're not going to be able to listen with care from our heart. So first, you want to take care of resourcing and tending to your nervous system. The second step is exploring empathy. And again, this one is done away from the person. So you're exploring empathy. And this one for you, Sarah, is empathy for self and other. So empathy for self says, like, let me give space to feel into and validate and acknowledge what has been the impact on me. I think a lot of people skip over this step of just letting yourself say, you know what, I didn't like that. That didn't feel good, and like really like giving yourself that. The other piece is empathy for others. So you do this before you even get to the conversation of like what might have been going on for them such that they did or didn't do that thing. Have they slept? Have they eaten food? What was their state of were they altered in any sort of way? Or like what missing information, what do I not know yet about the situation? So the empathy for self is the piece that I wanted to say, about people who are like martyrs, or people that are like, I can hold it, or I can, you know, I can hold it all. I can be responsible for it
Yes.
all, right? Okay, so the third step is, yeah. So the third step is permission, and and this is the one that I was excited to talk about in this conversation with what we're having, which is, in the permission, we acknowledge, we claim what level of charge we are. So we actually say, hey, I'm a level 2, I'm a level 6, I'm a level 5, which does a couple of different things. It helps you know where you are, but it also gives informed consent for the other person to say, do you feel available for me, if I'm at a 2, for us to have this conversation, or if I'm at a 9 for this conversation, right? So, but and then the other piece is, we create a desired outcome. So we say, I want to have this conversation in service of, and you put the desired outcome. Right. So if it's a 1, you could say, I have this thing I want to talk about, the text message that you sent yesterday, in service of both of us being super clear in our agreements, or both of us being on the same page, or us feeling connected, or, and the idea here with the desired outcome is you're actually like saying what the gifts are. What's the fruit? What's the benefit for us being willing to have this conversation? And the desired outcome works best when you can, uh, s- state something that is at our shared values. Like, I
Mhm.
imagine it would be a value of yours to feel trust. I imagine it would feel a value of yours to feel in connection, and for us to be on the same page with one another. So it can actually be enrolling, and like, alluring almost, of like, oh cool, I would want to have a conversation with you in service of us feeling more connected, right? So that's the permission. We frame it so that it does 2 things. One, um it has the other person consciously opt in, and like has them make sure that they are resourced, since you've already resourced yourself. And then the other thing is it frames the conversation. What is the intention? What is the purpose? What is the gifts that both of us are going to get by being willing to have this conversation? So those are the first 3 steps. I'll take a pause because that was a lot, and I'm curious what's coming up in hearing all of that.
How are we so lucky to live in the world where these kinds of conversations with this kind of guest is permanently enshrined in audio visual format? It truly is the best of all possible worlds. And it's brought to you by our supporters. Do you want to support the show? I thought you might ask. There are 3 ways you can do it. 1, you can go to patreon.com/thecontainer. Join our other amazing patrons who support the show with small monthly donations every month. This offsets the cost of running the podcast. There are a few easy and free ways you can support the show too. If you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, rate and review. And no matter how you consume the content, share with people you think would really like it. These things help the show. And now on to the rest of our interview with Dr. Hazel-Grace Yates.
Two big things are coming up for me. The first is that I can really feel your passion for this work. Like, that is something that I am noticing and really appreciating in this moment. The second is directly related to the first 3 steps, is that I maybe always skip the self-empathy step. And that is such an easy tweak. It's not that I don't want to give myself empathy. I literally forget. It's like having amnesia, where um like going through these processes, all the relational practices that we do, that is like the one thing I do last. It's
Mm,
and I heard you say like, yeah, like the martyr. It's like a mother thing too, where it's like, well, I mean, I have to take care of the kids before myself. Like there's, um,
Hmm.
when really it's better to take like that the mother is healthy to take care of the children. So it's probably better to for the mother to take care of herself first. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, so that's all that was coming up for me is like, wow, that's like a simple tweak, um, a subtle tweak,
Mm.
maybe challenging, but one that I'm here for.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
noticed. Yeah, the empathy for self is it's so strange how often it gets lost. I think that there is there is like the kind of seductive uh ego voice I get a lot that wants to frame things in ways that are really unfair to others and really uh paints myself in a really nice noble light. Um but like that's not really empathy. It's like you're like running a propaganda campaign in your own head to like get yourself to buy into this bullshit. And it's like empathy actually isn't trying to generate stories that are protective to your ego image. Empathy is like, this did happen and you feel this way, and that's okay. And yeah, and it's funny. I have like, there's this really kind of, again, it's almost at the level of instinct of like, um, it's a relationship to self that's much sterner and like don't be a pussy, just put up with it, and like we're gonna do this. And it's like it's kind of like not the nicest part of me, and it's the one that's directed at myself that has this kind of toxic sort of like, we're not, there's no crying in baseball kind of voice. It's really, yeah, it's just thinking about that right now, it's kind of hmm, real sad.
Yeah. So yeah, how hard we are on ourselves, or how we don't take the time to really let ourselves feel and acknowledge what it is and be with what it is that we're feeling and how we're being impacted.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and also one other thing that is useful in the empathy step is to take the time to notice, articulate, name, process what it is that you're feeling, so that when you get to the fifth step in the process, which is impact, you've already kind of like felt into, named, and said it, processed it somewhat, so that when you can share the impact, it's more of a concise share than like a long processing monologue, if you will.
Yes, I like that. The concision, and it's in it, I imagine too, it's like true because it's your sensation, it's your felt experience. It's devoid of story because it is like what is going on in your body at at the time. So
Yeah.
there's like this, I'm imagining that those first three steps are happening kind of close to when the thing occurred.
It can. It
Necessarily.
depends.
Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes that might take us a minute to realize that that
Yeah.
that there was an impact.
Yes. Yes. That's actually very
Yeah.
true. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Like a delayed reaction. Yeah. Would y'all like to hear the last three steps?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So, the next step is acknowledge. And so, acknowledge says, let's get on the same page and understand what we experience, so that we're not talking about how we feel about it. We're just making sure that we understand what movie are we talking about? Are we talking about the same movie? Um, the acknowledge, I talk about shared reality, getting to a shared reality. Sometimes our reality can match. And this is what I call simple shared reality. So, like something like you said you'd be home at 5:30, you got home at 6. We can agree that happened. Our realities match. Our memories, our interpretations match. Sometimes our realities don't match. our memories or interpretations are different. Um, and that's okay. It's navigatable. I call that complex shared reality. And that's when our memories are or our interpretations are different. And as long as we are both willing to say, I understand your reality, I understand your memory, we have a complex shared reality, and we can understand one another's impact based on understanding one another's realities. So the risk of not getting to fireworks.
That is
Um, the risk of not getting to shared reality and sharing our impact first is if I go into this heart share of like how something had me feel, but the other person's like, that's not how that happened. We're trying to talk into a heart space when we haven't even talked about like logistically. And then you get caught in the arguing and the who's right. And instead of actually just being in that tender heart space. So we clear out the what happened, and then we go to the impact. And the impact is, so when this thing happened that we've already talked about, this is how it impacted me. Emotions, sensations. Was there any sort of loss of trust, loss of money, loss of opportunity? Right. So those are the different ways in which we can be impacted. So we take time to really hear both people of how both of us were impacted from that the thing that did or didn't happen.
Mm.
So once we do impact, then the last step in the process is called restore integrity. And I love all the steps, but this one to me lights me up because if we just stop at an impact share or if we just stop at an apology, what we do is we run the risk of not understanding the mechanism of hurt. And if we don't understand the things that happened, what can happen is just recycling and repeating and having the same things happen over and over and over. So here we like really do a thorough job of understanding what happened and so that we can learn and do better in the future. Um, but also making sure that we don't have any residual resentment or any residual mistrust. And so I have 5 different pathways in the restore integrity that would really help us have this process be thorough and complete to come back into connection together. So the definition of conflict that I use is a break in trust or connection. And so restore integrity has the intention and the purpose to restore any trust or connection that was broken or lost. So the 5 pathways are remorse, which is pretty common, like some expression of apology or accountability. Revise agreements. Are there any agreements that we need to either write or revise? Rewrite stories. So this one is something happens, you make up a story. Like an example is um, my partner was not super excited to come rescue me on a motorcycle one time, and the story I made up was he doesn't care about me as much as I care about him. So that
Mm.
was a story that I created, and I can own that in the impact step. So in the restore integrity, me rewriting that story and writing the story that's more true and updated now. And what's true is my partner deeply cares about me. That's actually more true. And actually saying that out loud so that I'm seeing him through that truth of what's here now, as opposed to the story that I created. So we have remorse, revise agreements, rewrite stories, redo. This is one of my favorites. Redo is, now that we know that what we learned, what can we learn from that and do it better? So we actually like go back and say, oh, I could have said this, or I could have done this, or and like the more that you can embody the redo, um uh like from an embodied way and visualizing it helps us rewire our nervous system, our neural pathways, so that we have a map moving forward. Something similar happens like that in the future, we already have like a map of
Oh,
like how we can do it better in the future. Yeah.
that is so
Okay.
cool.
And then the last one is restorative actions. And so this is doing some sort of act or service. And my all-time favorite example that I gave in this is the day after my dad and I had our deep healing. He called me the next day and he said, I can't go back and change what I did, and I want to show up for you now, and I'd like to pay for your therapy for the rest of your life.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was an act that he did to restore the trust and the connection that was broken from the way that he had raised me. So that is the repair process.
Wow. And that was a pure download from Spirit.
The acronym and the words were
Yeah.
and the content and where that came from was 20 different names and organizations that I credit to contributing wisdom to this work. And so Spirit and my 14 years and all the other people, wisdom that contributed to that.
Yeah, I love that. There's like it's like you did all of the work and then it snaps in front of you.
Yeah.
It's like,
something
oh my
that
God, here it is.
When I first
Incredible.
heard about the repair process and watched your video, something that really struck me was how beautifully woven, like how there are so many different practices woven into this process, like seamlessly woven. It's like this was created by a master, like someone who has mastered a lot of different parts of authentic relating, of the relational arts, and then like created this tapestry of this like incredible process. Like that was actually the first I remember watching it and being like, and she's using that. Like it just,
Yeah,
yeah.
totally. And as you're saying that, like knowing that this work stands on the shoulders of giants and acknowledging all the people and the wisdom that came through, and I happen to be the vessel where this body of work is living through in this moment.
Yeah.
So that brings us to this really exciting point, because for us it's going to be just in 2 minutes or whatever, but for the audience this will be next episode. Sai and I are going to go through a repair process led by Dr. Hazel-Grace. So we're going to you're going to get a chance to see it in action, and yeah, I'm really excited. I'm a little nervous too because there's something, because it's actually more about work than our personal lives. It almost feels more edgy to me.
Ooh.
So
Yeah.
Interesting.
That is interesting.
Okay.
Great.
The container is now closed. Next week, we're going to show you a real live repair process led by none other than Dr. Hazel-Grace Yates herself. We actually talk about a dynamic between Sai and I that shows up around recording this show, so it feels really edgy, and that's podcasting, folks. It's a really unique episode, and we're just incredibly privileged to be able to bring this to you. Again, if you want to learn more about this incredible repair process from the person who developed it, then go to www.drhazelgrace.com. There you can sign up for her 8-week course, which starts July 2nd and runs to August 20th. Link in show notes. We have a nice way of closing. Keep it nasty.